Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss? Where today I have a very interesting story to share that came out this week about the planned sequel to Star Trek Beyond from the writers of the film themselves. As you probably already know, there have been many issues with getting another Star Trek movie made, and just recently, the film lost a planned release date in 2023. While the future of the next movie in the franchise is up in the air, this was not always the case, and for a 2.5-year period, the project was worked on by filmmakers J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay. If those names sort of sound familiar to you, it may be because they are now the showrunners of the Amazon Prime series The Lord of the Rings of Power. Recently, they were doing an interview about their experience on the series when they were also asked about their abandoned Star Trek film. In the interview, they discussed the plot of the unfilmed project that would have brought Chris Hemsworth back as Captain James Kirk's father, George. They also reveal many other details about the film, such as that a director was hired and how the story would have been connected to an episode of The Next Generation. Then they go over some pretty interesting details about their experience that may be a hint as to other projects that Paramount has in the works. So I thought it would be pretty fun to look at their comments and wonder what this movie possibly would have been like on screen. But before I get into it, please remember to leave a like on this video and subscribe if you have not. So as I mentioned, this news comes to us from an interview that J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay did, which was with the magazine Esquire, that mostly had to do with their Lord of the Rings series, which just finished its first season. By the way, I love the series and Lord of the Rings in general, so be on the lookout for some future videos about that on this channel. But back to the Star Trek, at the tail end of the interview, they were asked about their canceled film. They both seemed very excited to speak on the topic, which makes sense after they revealed that they spent the better part of 2.5 years working on it before it was canceled. That is a long time to work on something to not have it see the light of day, which is kind of disappointing not only for them, but for us fans that really want to see another Star Trek film. And it sounds like Paramount had a lot of plans for the franchise that may have also fizzled out. Because the first thing that Patrick McKay says about the project when asked is that they had worked on a couple of Star Trek movies, and that this one in particular would have been a sequel to 2016 Star Trek Beyond. This tells me that the rumors that have been circulating about multiple Star Trek films being in development have been true, and that perhaps the other project that they do not speak about in this interview is the film that Paramount is currently still working on. But Patrick McKay goes on to say this about the film that they had worked on that would have been a sequel to Star Trek Beyond. The one you're asking about would have been the fourth in the franchise, reuniting Chris Hemsworth and Chris Pine. The concept was that through a cosmic quirk in the Star Trek world, they were the same age. It was going to be a grandfather-son space adventure, think Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in space. This plot sounds to me like it would have been hyper-focused on the Kirks, and perhaps the rest of the cast would not have played as big a role as they did in prior movies. This may have been by design, as a subtle way to handle the passing of Anton Yelchin, who died tragically in 2016 and played Pavel Chekhov in those films. Fans had wondered how any movie with this cast would be able to proceed without the actor, and by centering a plot around 2 or 3 main characters instead of the usual ensemble cast, this probably would have lessened the hole left by the actor's passing. Mr. McKay also reveals that their Star Trek film had already hired a director in S.J. Clarkson and hired Lindsay Weber as a producer. S.J. Clarkson sounds like the exact type of director that Paramount had been looking for, as she has nearly 20 years of experience directing episodes of some of the most popular series such as Orange is the New Black, Jessica Jones, and Heroes. She even directed mine and a lot of other people's favorite episode of the series Dexter.
Hello, Dexter Morgan.
There have been many reports that Paramount were trying to attract a female director to this project, and given all of her accomplishments, hiring Ms. Clarkson sounds like it would have been a great fit for the film. But don't cry for her, as she has moved on to another big project. In her case, it will be the next film in the Sony Spider-Man universe titled Madam Web, which is set to release in 2024. If you are a Star Trek fan, one thing that should bum you out is that all of these people who have been hired and left these unrealized Star Trek films have moved on to huge projects. As I mentioned, the 2 writers interviewed for this article are now the showrunners on Rings of Power. The last director that Paramount had attached to a Star Trek film was Matt Shakman, who went back to Marvel Disney and will be directing the Fantastic Four movie set to release in 2024. Even Noah Hawley, who I believe was the director attached to the next Star Trek film after J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay had moved on, will be the showrunner on the upcoming Alien series on Hulu. Whatever the issue is that Paramount has with getting a Star Trek movie made, it isn't hiring good people to work on it. So I truly hope they lock down the next creative team they find to take on this movie, because if not, it is obvious that someone else is going to snatch them up. But back to the interview, J.D. Payne was also nice enough to reveal the main plot of the film and how the characters would meet. Many people assumed that James Kirk would have to travel back in time to meet his thought-to-be deceased father, but by using a plot device from an episode of The Next Generation, that would not have been the case. Mr. Payne had this to say about their story. There's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Relics, where they find Scotty, who's been trapped in a transporter for a couple of decades, and they're able to have a cool adventure with him. Our concept was, what if right before the Kelvin impacted with that huge mining ship, George Kirk had tried to beam himself over to his wife's shuttle where his son Jim Kirk had just been born? And what if the ship hadn't been completely exploded? What if it left some space junk? So basically the story was that George Kirk would have been trapped in a transporter buffer for 35 years and then brought back to the land of the living by his son and his crew, who finds the wreckage of his ship. If you are unfamiliar with the episode of The Next Generation that he is referencing, in Relics, Scotty stores his pattern in a transporter buffer to save his own life and is then saved by the crew of the Enterprise D. That episode isn't as much an adventure though, as it is Scotty trying to acclimate to his new surroundings in the future. And speaking about the plot of the film, Patrick McKay added that, so the adventure is that Chris Pine and the crew of the Enterprise have to sneak out the wreckage of the ship that his father died on because of a mystery and a new villain. In the ship, they stumble across his father's pattern. They beam him out and he has no idea that no time has passed at all and that he's looking at his son. Then the adventure goes from there. It is fascinating that the villain of the film would have been tied to his father's ship, the USS Kelvin, and is responsible for James Kirk finding his father alive so many years later. If you recall from the 2009 film, George Kirk heard his newborn son Jim be born just as he sent the Kelvin on a collision course with the Narada. As a father, I can only imagine the shock of hearing your child's first cry as a newborn and then meeting them as a fully grown adult moments later. However, after hearing the plot, I am not sure it was such a bad idea that this film was scrapped. First of all, bringing Chris Hemsworth back as a main character would shift the focus of the story to him and away from the rest of the crew. My favorite Star Trek adventures are the ones where the whole crew is involved, and while some of my favorite episodes have been character-based, I don't think I would want to see that in a film. Also, having Chris Hemsworth play a man out of time would be a pretty redundant plot device in these films, since every movie in the Kelvin universe already featured at least one character who is not native to the time period. In the 2009 film, we obviously had Nero and Prime Spock who traveled back in time. Then in the sequel, Star Trek Into Darkness, Khan was removed from stasis after being placed there in the 20th century. Then in Star Trek Beyond, we had the villain Krall, who was actually Balthazar Edison, a human who served in the United Earth Defense Force, which existed before the Federation and Starfleet and was kept alive by alien technology. There has to be another way to introduce a character and not have them be from the future or the past. I also think that the plot similarity to the Next Generation episode Relics would have been an issue with fans. In that episode, it was made clear that the only reason that Scotty was kept alive is because he is a miracle worker and was able to rig the transporter system to do it. There was also another crewman that Scotty tried to save, but their pattern was not able to be retrieved. If in this film George Kirk was saved through similar means, but was able to survive by some freak accident, I think it diminishes how difficult and unlikely it was for Scotty to have been able to save himself in that episode. Hearing about how close this film came to being produced is disappointing, and I wonder why it was ultimately canceled. Rumors are that it was over a contract dispute with Chris Hemsworth, who wanted more money to return not just because his role would have been bigger, but because he is a popular actor. The plot to me does not sound that interesting, but hearing someone talk about it and seeing it on screen are two very different things, so perhaps it would have been successful. Sadly, we will never know since this project has been canceled and all the creators have moved on to other things. But let me know in the comments, what do you think of the plot of this movie, and would you have liked to see this film made? Well, that is everything I have, but let me know in the comments if I missed anything. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please hit that like button if you have enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time on What Did I Miss?